I will tell you, because no one else was paying close enough attention to tell it right. My brother Crispin, the 8th Duke of Havenmere, the most sought-after bachelor in 3 counties, the man whom half the mothers in England had circled in their private ledgers as a prospective son-in-law, had refused 7 brides in 4 years. Not rejected precisely. He had simply failed to choose. He had attended the dinners, danced the obligatory sets, nodded at the right moments, and returned home to Havenmere House in a state of perfect indifference. The mothers wrote him off as impossible. The daughters privately agreed. 2 of them were visibly relieved. My grandmother, Lady Constance Ashby, widow of the 6th Duke and the most clear-eyed woman I have ever known, watched all of it from her wingback chair by the fire and said nothing for 4 years. I was 26 that summer and not yet as wise as I imagined. I assumed her silence meant resignation. I was wrong. She was simply waiting until she had gathered enough information to act. The house party at Fenmere, our grandmother's own country property in the Wiltshire Hills, a rambling golden stone house that smelled of lavender and old books and had more fireplaces than any one family could keep lit in winter, was announced in April for July. 12 guests, 1 long fortnight. Crispin was told it was a family gathering with a few neighbors invited for courtesy. He believed this because he wished to. He arrived on a Wednesday evening in the middle of a long summer dusk, dusty from the road, tolerably rested, in what I would have called reasonably good spirits, and found the drawing room arranged with more young ladies than any family gathering had ever required. He gave me a look across the room that said, quite plainly, "I have been managed." I shrugged. I had known for 3 weeks and had chosen not to mention it, partly because grandmother had asked me not to and partly because I was curious to see how long it took him to figure it out himself. The answer, it turned out, was approximately 45 minutes. He had the whole picture by the time we sat down to dinner. He was not angry about it. That was the interesting thing. He had been angry about the previous arrangements, the introductions engineered at other people's balls, the dinners where he discovered too late that the neighboring daughter had been specifically placed beside him, the weekends at houses where the guest list bore a suspicious resemblance to a matrimonial catalog. He had been patient and polite about all of it and quietly furious on the carriage ride home. But this time, something in him simply settled into a kind of resigned tolerance, and I could not quite determine whether it was because he had run out of resistance or because grandmother's house had always been the one place in England where he permitted himself to be easy. There were 3 heiresses among the guests, 1 baron's daughter of considerable beauty, a widow of impeccable lineage, and the usual assortment of accomplished young women our grandmother had selected with the careful eye of a general surveying terrain. They were, every one of them, what any sensible man would call excellent prospects. 2 spoke French fluently. 1 played the pianoforte with genuine feeling. The widow had a laugh that could warm a room and a wit that was sharper than she generally displayed in mixed company. The baron's daughter was, quite simply, very beautiful in the particular way that makes rooms quieter when a woman enters them. Crispin was polite to all of them. He was warm even. He had good manners. Our mother had seen to that before she died, and the estate's demands had sharpened them further, because a duke who cannot manage his tenants and his guests and his parliamentary obligations simultaneously is a duke whose estate suffers. He spoke to each young woman with genuine attention. He asked them real questions, not the pro forma questions of social performance. He listened to their answers. He found, I think, things to genuinely admire in most of them. He simply could not seem to locate whatever feeling was supposed to ignite. It is a particular kind of loneliness, that failure, the loneliness of someone who can see, perfectly clearly, that a thing is good and still cannot want it. He had been living in that loneliness for 4 years, and had managed it in the way that capable men manage most things. He had organized his life around it so that its absence was administrative rather than acute. There were the estate accounts. There was the drainage problem in the East Field. There was his seat in the Lords. There was the correspondence that never seemed to diminish no matter how many letters he answered. He was a busy man and a useful one, and he had told himself that this was sufficient, and on most days he believed it. I noticed him, on the second evening, drifting away from a very animated discussion of the season's concerts, and finding a quiet corner by the window where he stood with his wine and looked out at the darkened garden with the expression of a man who has misplaced something and cannot quite remember what it was. It was not unhappiness, precisely. It was closer to the feeling you get when a piece of music ends, and you sit for a moment in the silence after, not quite ready to stand up. I also noticed from across the room that he was not entirely alone in that corner. There was a young woman seated in the chair nearest the window, not one of the invited prospects, but the companion of Sir Edmund Farley's youngest daughter, Miss Philippa. The companion was reading. She had clearly chosen that chair for its light. The last of the evening sun came through those particular panes at that particular hour, falling warm and amber across the pages, and she had a small book held at a sensible angle, and she was entirely absorbed in it, as though the animated concert discussion and the gently competitive social theater of 12 house-party guests had nothing whatsoever to do with her. This was not rudeness. She was not ignoring the room. She was simply present in herself, in a way that did not require the room's participation. Crispin glanced at her. She did not look up. He looked out the window again, then back at her. She turned a page. He stayed by that window for another few minutes, then moved to join Sir Edmund at the card table, and that was the end of it for the evening. I thought very little of it at the time. In retrospect, I should have paid closer attention. Her name was Verity Ashcombe. I learned this the following morning, when I came down to the breakfast room early and found her there before anyone else, already at the sideboard, helping herself to toast and a cup of tea with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to beginning the day without assistance. She was perhaps 3 or 4 and 20, with dark hair simply dressed, no elaborate arrangement, just clean and well pinned, and eyes of a gray so clear they were almost silver. She was not a beauty in the way the season's beauties were manufactured. There was no particular artifice, no calculated arrangement of her face into its best angles. She was simply, cleanly, entirely herself, and this created in her an unusual quality of presence, the kind of person who occupies a room without reaching for it. I introduced myself. She was perfectly civil and not at all flustered, which I mention because many young women became flustered when introduced to the Duke of Havenmere's younger brother at an unexpected hour, particularly when they had not expected to encounter anyone at the breakfast table, and had arrived in the assumption of solitude. Miss Ashcombe gave no indication of finding my presence alarming. She asked whether I preferred tea or coffee in the mornings, and poured me a cup of the former without further ceremony, as though we were old acquaintances resuming a comfortable habit. "You are Miss Philippa's companion," I said. "I am." She sat and buttered her toast. "Your grandmother is very kind to include me among the party." "Grandmother is kind," I agreed. "She is also strategic." Miss Ashcombe looked at me over her teacup with an expression that was measuring in a pleasant way, the look of someone deciding how much directness to extend in a first conversation. "Most kind people are," she said. I decided I liked her immediately and without qualification. There was something in the precision of that answer that told me she was not performing equanimity, but genuinely possessed it. I asked her where she had grown up, and she told me about the Shropshire village and the clergyman's modest house, and the large library her father had assembled over 30 years on a living that had barely supported the assembling of it. She told me this without self-pity, and without the particular performative rueful manner that some people adopt when describing reduced circumstances, as though she were describing the weather, a fact of the landscape, simply as it was. I watched her return to her breakfast and her book and thought, as I ate my own toast, that I had never met anyone quite like her. I also thought, with a vagueness that I would not identify clearly until later, that grandmother had done something very particular in bringing her here. But I gave no thought to what it was. I should have. The days at Fenmere moved in their pleasant country house rhythm, morning walks for those who wanted them, the library and the garden for those who didn't, afternoons that organized themselves around whatever weather the day produced, evenings of music and cards and conversation, carried out in the drawing room with the firelight, and the candlelight, and grandmother presiding from her chair with the benign ease of someone who has spent 60 years managing rooms. Crispin performed his duties as a guest, and as his grandmother's grandson with what I can only call disciplined patience. He spoke to the heiresses. He danced when dancing was organized on the Tuesday evening. He complimented the Baron's daughter on her playing. She played well, a genuine compliment, and he had a long and apparently genuinely engaging conversation with the widow about the state of the new railway lines, which were by this time becoming impossible to ignore even at country house parties. But I noticed, and I was perhaps the only person paying close enough attention to notice, that he kept finding himself near Verity Ashcombe. Not seeking her. That is the important distinction, the one that I have thought about carefully since. He was not pursuing her or contriving occasions to be beside her. He was simply arriving in the same vicinity, in the way that objects in the same orbit gradually draw close to one another through some force neither of them has chosen, but both of them are subject to. He came to the library one afternoon to retrieve a particular volume of Gibbon's Decline and Fall, which he had been meaning to reread for 2 years, and found her there among the shelves, running her finger along the spines with the focused attention of someone for whom books are old friends being revisited after a long separation. He stayed longer than the Gibbon required, considerably longer, as the Gibbon was on the 3rd shelf from the bottom in the first alcove, and was not difficult to locate. I know this because I had come to the library a half-hour later and found it empty, but Crispin at dinner that evening referenced 3 separate titles he had apparently re-encountered on the shelves during his visit. He had not read 2 of them in years. He described them with the particular warmth of someone who has been reminded of something he had forgotten he loved. He encountered her on the terrace before breakfast on Thursday, when the morning mist was still lying across the hills in long white skeins, and the air had that clean early quality of a summer day before it has committed to being warm. She had come outside with her tea and her face turned up to the light, her eyes closed, not meditation, I think, but simply the pleasure of morning on your face when you have learned not to expect pleasures to announce themselves. He had come out for the same quiet reason. He had always been an early riser, a habit formed in boyhood and sharpened by years of estate management, and the summer mornings at Fenmere were genuinely beautiful in a way that the mornings at Havenmere, which was a finer house, somehow were not. They did not speak at length. From what I gathered later, they did not speak at length most times. Their early conversations had a quality of comfortable intermittence, thoughts offered and received without the pressure to sustain a continuous exchange. But when I asked Crispin that evening whether he'd enjoyed the morning, he said yes with a small particular quietness that was slightly different from his usual yes. I mentioned to grandmother, as we sat in the garden before dinner, that Crispin seemed to keep orbiting Miss Ashcombe's vicinity without precisely approaching it. She merely sipped her tea and said, "Yes," as though this were the least surprising thing I had told her all week. "You arranged this," I said. "I arranged a house party," she said, "and invited the guests I thought most interesting. Miss Ashcombe is not an heiress. She is not even, she has nothing, grandmother, no connections of any value. Her father was a clergyman who left nothing but a box of books and a modest amount of debt. She has herself," grandmother said. "That is rather more than most of the young women in this drawing room have managed to assemble." I looked at her for a long moment. She looked back at me with the serenity of someone who has already won an argument she has not yet had. I recognized that look. She had worn it throughout my childhood on every occasion when she knew something I didn't, which was most occasions. "He doesn't know you chose her for him," I said. "Crispin," she said, setting down her tea and folding her hands with the precision of someone making a careful point, "is not a man who can be chosen for. He is a man who must believe he is choosing himself. This is why 7 young women have come and gone without result. They were presented to him, and he felt the presentation, and he could not get past feeling managed into a thing he hadn't decided he wanted. The resentment closed him off before the woman had a chance." She paused. "I have simply arranged the conditions in which he might choose, without feeling the choosing was done for him. That is an extremely fine distinction." "Most important things are," she said. I went to bed that night with the distinct feeling of watching something unfold that had been set in motion long before I arrived. It was not unlike watching a clock that has been wound and set, and simply requires patience. On Friday, the weather was golden and a little warm, that particular English July warmth that is generous without being oppressive, and grandmother organized a picnic on the south lawn, that long slope of grass running down to the ornamental water with its 2 old willows and its view across the valley to the line of hills beyond. The footmen set up tables and chairs, and laid out a luncheon with the effortless plenty that grandmother managed without appearing to manage anything. The guests spread across the lawn in their natural groupings, the baron's daughter and the widow finding the shade of the left-hand willow together, and falling into what appeared to be a genuinely warm conversation. 2 of the heiresses walking the path around the water with their respective mothers. Sir Edmund and Crispin drifting toward the view, as men tend to do, as though standing at the farthest point from the house and looking outward gives them something the house cannot. The seating at the main picnic table had been arranged, as I had come to expect, with a precision that appeared entirely casual. Crispin found himself beside an empty chair when he came to the table, and Verity occupied that chair approximately 3 minutes later, arriving slightly flushed, because she had been helping one of the footmen manage a cloth that the mild breeze was threatening to send into the lemonade. She settled into her seat with a composed practicality, discovered that she was beside the Duke of Havenmere and said, "Good afternoon," and reached for the lemonade. He handed her the pitcher before she had to stretch for it. It was not a dramatic beginning. Nothing about the way they came together was dramatic. But I watched it from 3 chairs away, and what I saw was something I had not seen on my brother's face in a very long time, a slight ease, a particular quality of attention directed at something that was engaging him, not because obligation required it, but because the thing itself was genuinely interesting. He was listening to her the way he listened to a state business he found genuinely important, with the whole of his mind, not the fraction that politeness reserved for conversation. They spoke about the valley first, the names of the hills, whether either of them knew the history of the estate. She did not know it. She had been told the house was Queen Anne, but the older wing might be earlier. He told her about the water feature, which his grandmother's husband had put in, and she asked whether the ornamental fish in it were original to the design or additions, and he said he genuinely did not know, and she said that ornamental fish were always the thing people forgot to record, and he laughed. Then somehow they were speaking about the books in the library. Then I caught only pieces, and I was trying not to appear to listen with any particular attention, although I was listening with all of it, about whether it was better to read a book slowly or quickly, and what it meant for a book to be worthy of rereading. "I have reread the same 3 books so many times that I nearly have them memorized," she said. "I used to feel guilty about that, as though I should be acquiring new ones instead of returning to old ones, as though reading were a matter of territory covered rather than depth reached. And now I think it is simply a different kind of knowledge," she said. "You read the same book at 20 and again at 30 and again at 40, and it is not the same book because you are not the same reader. You have more in you to meet it with." He was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when something had landed. "Which 3?" he said. She told him. I did not catch the titles from where I sat. But I saw his expression when she finished. The look of someone who has just heard a thing said simply that he has been trying to articulate to himself for years without finding the right formulation. As though she had reached into a room he had been circling and unlocked it from the inside. After the picnic, I went to find grandmother. She was sitting in the shade near the willows, her embroidery in her lap, with the expression of someone engaged in nothing more consequential than enjoying the afternoon light. She was not doing any embroidering. The seating arrangement, I said, was determined by the footman, whom I did instruct in certain particulars, yes. She did not look up from the embroidery she was not doing. You're quite extraordinary, you know. I am a grandmother, she said. It is the same thing. She smoothed the fabric on her knee. Your brother has been alone for 6 years. Since your mother died, he has carried Havenmere, the estate, the tenants, the seat in the Lords, the household, the accounts, the correspondence, all of it. He has carried it with his usual capable efficiency, and he has done it well, and he has done it without once asking anyone to share the weight, not because no one has offered. Because he has forgotten that sharing is permitted. He has managed for so long that he has confused management with living. She paused. Miss Ashcombe lost her father at 17 and her mother at 19, and has made her own way in the world since then on nothing but her wits and her dignity. She knows exactly what it costs to carry things alone, and she has the intelligence and the strength not to be frightened by the weight when someone offers to let her share it. I sat down on the grass beside her chair. Does she know what you intend for her? I have told her nothing, grandmother said. I brought her here. I have arranged the library and the morning terrace and the seating on the lawn. What happens next is between them. And if nothing happens, she resumed very slightly the motion of embroidering, then I shall try again at Christmas. I have a cousin in Bath who hosts excellent winter parties and owes me a favor. I laughed despite myself. She did not. On Saturday, Crispin joined the morning walk. This was notable because he had not joined any of the morning walks so far, preferring the early hours for estate correspondence at the desk in grandmother's study, a habit he carried everywhere, the work following him like a loyal and demanding dog. The walk was organized by Miss Philippa Farley, who was 19 and enthusiastic, and had a genuine fondness for wildflowers, and pointing them out to anyone who came within range with the evangelical certainty of someone sharing a faith. 6 of us went. Miss Philippa, her mother Mrs. Farley, 2 of the heiresses, Crispin, and because Miss Philippa did not go anywhere without her companion, and because grandmother had said the previous evening with perfect casualness that the morning walk would be particularly fine, Verity. The path ran along the ridge above the house and through a wood of old beeches where the light came through the high canopy in long, slow bars, and the ground was soft with years of accumulated leaves, almost silent underfoot. Miss Philippa kept slightly ahead, exclaiming over something in a hedgerow. The 2 heiresses kept together a little way behind, deep in their own conversation. Mrs. Farley fell back fairly early with a mild expressed concern about the uneven ground in her ankle, which may or may not have been genuine, but which left Crispin and Verity on the middle stretch of path with no particular social obligation to include anyone else. I stayed just far enough back to hear them without appearing to. She was telling him about a beech wood near the Shropshire village where she had grown up, a wood very like this one, same silver bark, same cathedral height of canopy, same quality of filtered light making the whole space feel like something set apart. Her father had brought her there on Sunday afternoons when she was small and taught her the names of the trees. Not just the common names but the Latin, and she had thought for years that the Latin was the trees' real names, the names they called themselves when no one was listening. "Did you keep the Latin?" he said. "I kept all of it," she said, "everything he taught me." There was a brief quiet, not uncomfortable, just the pause of someone deciding whether to say the next thing. "He died when I was 17. I have found since then that the things he taught me are the most reliably mine of anything I own. Property can be lost. Circumstances change. But the Latin names of trees and the Greek roots of words and the way a proof builds from first principles, those I carry with me and no one can take them. Crispin said nothing for a moment. I could see, from my position behind them, the set of his shoulders, something careful there, something attending. My mother died 6 years ago, he said. I find I still reach for her opinion on things she never had the chance to consider. When there is a decision I can't resolve, not the estate decisions, those I can manage, but the larger ones. The questions about what kind of man I am becoming. I still find myself thinking, well, what would she say about this? He paused. She would have an opinion. She always did. Yes, Verity said simply, that exactly. They walked in silence for a while after that, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the particular silence of two people who have said something true and do not need to pad it with elaboration. I let them have it and fell further back. That evening, Saturday, the 6th night of the party, there was music in the drawing room after dinner. Mrs. Farley played a very correct Clementi sonata, carefully executed and pleasant to hear. One of the heiresses sang an Italian air with genuine skill and genuine feeling. She had a lovely voice, warmly colored, and the room was genuinely moved by it. Grandmother presided from her chair near the fire with the benign satisfaction of someone at a concert she has herself arranged, which was entirely accurate. Verity did not perform. She sat near the fireplace with Miss Philippa, and when I caught her eye across the room she gave me a small, composed smile that had in it no apology for her quietness. She was not retiring from the evening. She was simply in it on her own terms, which were different from the terms of the guests who were expected to display accomplishments, and she was entirely at peace with that difference. Crispin played chess with Sir Edmund Farley for part of the evening. He was a very good chess player, and had always found it one of the few competitive activities that genuinely interested him, because the game is entirely honest. And when the music shifted to something livelier and a few of the younger guests moved the chairs back for an informal dance, he finished the game, resigned the board with the graciousness of a man who has won cleanly, and found himself drifting, as he had drifted all week, in the way of something pulled by a force it has not yet named, toward the fireplace. Miss Philippa, with the irresistible energy of 19 and a fine real beginning, was immediately claimed for the first dance by one of the younger gentlemen. This left Verity near the fire with a glass of claret and a very small smile at Philippa's delight, the smile of someone who finds other people's happiness a genuine pleasure to observe. Crispin sat down in the vacated chair. "You don't dance," he said. "I wasn't invited to," she said, pleasantly and without particular weight to it. He considered this. "I'm inviting you now." "That is very kind," she said, "but I think you are meant to be dancing with Miss Harrington." She indicated, with the subtlest movement of her eyes, one of the heiresses, who was indeed awaiting a partner with the gracious patience of someone who has learned to perform patience very well. "Miss Harrington is very well provided for," he said. "There is no shortage of willing partners for her. She will not suffer if I sit here for one dance." "Your grandmother will notice." "My grandmother," he said, "has been arranging this party with the strategic precision of a general. She can sustain one tactical deviation." Something shifted in his expression, a dry humor, and beneath it something quieter and more direct. "Miss Harrington is very accomplished. She is also, I think, somewhat relieved when the Duke of Havenmere stops requiring her to be interesting." Verity looked at him. I saw it from across the room, the slight change in her expression, something opening a fraction. Not performance, not the careful social warmth she deployed in large rooms, something more particular than that. "All right," she said. They danced. I watched from the far side of the room, maintaining my careful pretense of interest in my wine. Grandmother, I noticed, had set down her embroidery and was watching too, with no pretense at all. I should say that Crispin dances well, he always has, our mother insisted on it. And Verity, it turned out, danced with a natural ease that had nothing studied in it. She had not been trained in a London season's dancing masters. Whatever she had was simply her own. They were not showy. They made no claim on the room's attention. They were simply, for those few minutes, entirely present to each other, and the room and the music and the other dancers existed at a slight remove, and I think they both knew it, and I think the knowing was as surprising to Verity as it was to Crispin. When the music ended, they stood for a moment in the small space between stopping and stepping apart. She curtsied, thanked him, and went back to the fireplace. He watched her go just a moment, not long, and then crossed the room and danced with Miss Harrington, who was indeed gracious about it. He performed his duties for the remainder of the evening, with his usual correct attention. But I had seen his face in that moment after the music stopped. I know my brother. I know that particular expression, the one he wears when something has taken hold of him, and he is not yet prepared to admit it to himself, let alone anyone else. It is a look of someone who has just realized that the thing he has been looking for was not what he was looking for at all, and that this has inconvenient implications. Sunday passed with church in the village, a small Norman church with a low tower and box pews, and a vicar who preached with more enthusiasm than precision, and a quiet afternoon that people filled as they liked. I found a book in the garden bench and occupied both with great contentment. Crispin worked in the study in the morning, which I expected, and was absent from the house in the afternoon for a long solitary ride, which I also expected. He often worked things out on horseback. I went to find grandmother in her sitting room, and found her writing letters with the purposeful efficiency of someone managing a correspondence. She has allowed to accumulate to a manageable mass, and is now dispatching. "How much longer?" I asked. She looked up. "Pardon." "The party, the arrangement. How much longer before he—" I gestured vaguely. "Ah," she blotted her letter. "That is not mine to time, that is his. I have created the conditions. What he does inside them is his own. And if he is slow—" "Miss Ashcombe will leave on Thursday with the Farleys," she said, setting down her pen with great composure, "and Crispin will spend the subsequent months discovering that everything is dimmer than it was, and he will attribute this first to the weather and then to the estate accounts, and then to general dissatisfaction, and eventually, probably in October, I estimate, he will come to me and tell me that he thinks he may have been foolish about someone, and I will tell him where Miss Ashcombe can be found. And the story will continue from there. It will simply take longer," she resumed, writing. "I prefer Thursday to October. But I have been a patient woman for 64 years, and I can sustain a few more months." I stared at her. She did not look up. "You are extraordinary," I said. "I am a grandmother," she said. "It is the same thing." On Monday, I saw something shift in Crispin. It was early morning. He had gone to the stables before breakfast. He had been exercising one of grandmother's horses during the party, a fine gray with a tendency to become sullen if underworked, and I had come out to the stable yard for the same reason, my own horse having developed a similar temperament. He was already there, working on the girth with the focused competence of a man who learned horses before he learned accounts, and he looked up when I came in with the expression of someone who has been thinking for several hours and has arrived, with some reluctance, at something. "Sit down," he said. I sat on the mounting block. He went on with the girth without looking at me. "Tell me about Miss Ashcombe," he said. "What do you want to know?" "Everything you know." I told him what I knew, which was not inconsiderable but was not intimate. Her father, the clergyman, and the Shropshire Library, the 3 books she reread, the Latin names of trees, the particular quality of her self-possession, the way she occupied a room without reaching for attention, the directness of her conversation when she trusted that directness was welcome. He listened without interrupting, with the complete attention he reserved for estate reports that actually mattered. She's a companion, he said when I finished. She is. No family connections of any standing, no property, no settlement. No, I said. He was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on the gray's neck with the absent ease of long familiarity. That's not the thing that would concern me, he said slowly, as though he were working through it in real time. Havenmere doesn't need money, that's not the question. What is the question? He looked at me then, and there was something in his face that I had not seen in several years, a kind of honest bewilderment, as though he had found something inside himself that he had not expected to find and was not quite sure what to do with it. She's going to leave on Thursday, he said. With the Farleys, yes. He did not say anything more. He finished with the horse, mounted, and rode out. I watched him go through the stable yard gate and felt something settle in my chest, the particular feeling of watching something become inevitable that has been building slowly enough that you almost didn't notice until it was nearly upon you. Monday afternoon brought an unexpected rain, not a storm but a steady, soft, determined rain that settled in around 2 o'clock and showed no inclination to move on. The guests relocated indoors with the cheerful adaptability of people practiced at English country house parties, and the drawing room arranged itself into the pleasant scattered picture of a dozen people finding their preferred indoor occupation. Cards at one table, conversation at another, needlework near the window, a book near the fire. I was losing at whist to grandmother and Mrs. Farley, losing badly, as I always did when playing against grandmother, who had been taking money at whist from unwary opponents for 40 years and had no intention of stopping, when I noticed that Crispin and Verity were both absent from the drawing room. I thought nothing of it at first. Then the hand ended, and I excused myself for a moment and found one of the footmen, who told me with impeccable neutrality that the Duke had been observed going toward the library approximately 20 minutes prior, and that Miss Ashcombe had likewise been seen heading in the direction of the upper corridor not long after. I did not follow. It seemed important for once to leave this entirely unobserved. What I know of what happened there, I know because Crispin told me afterward. Not all of it. He is a private man and I am his brother, not his confessor, but enough. He had gone to the library for the Gibbon again, genuinely this time, wanting a particular passage he remembered but couldn't locate precisely in his memory. She came in 10 minutes later for a volume she had been wanting to re-find since the first day. They occupied the same library in a shared comfortable quiet for a time, the rain on the windows, the fire, the particular piece of a room full of books on a wet afternoon. Then she said, still looking at her book, "I think your grandmother arranged rather a great deal of this." "Yes," he said. "She did. Does that trouble you?" He was quiet for a moment, honestly considering it. "It might have once," he said. "I spent 4 years resenting the arrangements. I thought the resentment was about the presumption other people deciding what I should want and presenting it as a fait accompli. But I think now it was that none of the arrangements had any," he paused, seeking the word, "point. There was nothing in them that caught. I could see perfectly clearly that each woman was admirable, and I simply could not." He stopped again. "This one has a point," he said. She looked up from her book. He let her look. She said, with the careful honesty that was characteristic of her, "I am not certain what you mean by that." "I think you are," he said. "I think you know precisely what I mean, and have known for several days, and have been deciding what to do with it." "A beat." "So have I," he said. "Decided what to do with it. I haven't arrived anywhere yet, but I am closer than I was." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, with the same care but not unkindly, "I am a companion, Your Grace. I have nothing. I am here because Miss Philippa invited me and your grandmother permitted it, and on Thursday I will return with the Farleys and resume my place in their household, and that is—" "I know what you are," he said. "I am asking what you might wish to be, if circumstances permitted it, if someone were asking." She looked at him for a long time. He did not look away. "I am not accustomed to being asked that," she said finally. Her voice was entirely steady. It was only the stillness of her hands, very still, on her book that told him anything. "I know," he said. "I am asking it now." He told me that she said, after a moment, that she had thought from the first evening that he was not what she had expected a duke to be. That she had been very careful, since that first evening, not to think beyond the observation, because thinking beyond it was the kind of foolishness she had trained herself out of years ago, when it had become clear that foolishness was a luxury she could not afford. He told me, he said, that what she was describing sounded to him very much like sense, wearing the costume of foolishness to protect itself. And she had laughed, not the careful social laugh she used in rooms full of guests, but something real and slightly surprised and entirely her own. And he had thought, hearing it, that he had not managed to make anyone laugh like that in a very long time, and that the sound of it was one of the best things he had heard all year. He told me he asked, plainly, whether she would permit him to call on her properly after the party through Sir Edmund Farley, with the full weight of proper intention behind it. And she said, equally plainly, that she would. That was Monday. On Tuesday and Wednesday, I watched my brother with new eyes. He was different in those final days of the party, not dramatically, not in any way the other guests would have catalogued or remarked upon, but different in the particular way of a man in whom something has settled. He was still the attentive guest his grandmother required. He still spoke to the heiresses, still played chess with Sir Edmund, still managed the social architecture of the fortnight with his usual competence. But there was no longer the quality of a man moving through a gallery finding nothing. There was instead the quality of a man who has found what he came for and is carrying it carefully, not yet willing to display it, but entirely certain it is there. Verity, for her part, was herself. This is the most accurate thing I can say about her across all the days I observed her. She was herself, consistently and without apology, and the only change in those last 2 days was something in the quality of her steadiness, as though a small weight she had been carrying without noticing had been set down, and the ease in her was slightly different for its absence. On Wednesday evening, grandmother gathered the party after dinner and proposed toasts to the summer, to Fenmere, to all her dear guests, each of whom had made the fortnight what it was. She spoke with a warmth that was genuine and only the smallest degree theatrical. She looked at each person in the room as she spoke, and when her eyes came to Verity, they rested there a beat longer than anywhere else, and there was in that look a depth of satisfaction that was entirely private, visible only to someone who had been watching and knew what to look for. I looked for it, I found it. Thursday morning came soft and clear, the summer having recovered its temper after the Monday rain, and decided to close out the fortnight with its best behavior. The light was golden across the lawns, the valley below the house deep green and quiet, and it was the kind of morning that is almost impossible to leave without some regret. The Farleys were departing after breakfast. Cases carried down, the carriage loaded and brought round, goodbyes conducted in the entrance hall with the warm efficiency of people who have enjoyed themselves, and are genuinely sorry to go but have households and obligations awaiting them. Miss Philippa said her goodbyes with genuine feeling and promises to write to grandmother that I was fairly certain she would keep. Mrs. Farley thanked grandmother with the fulsome warmth of someone who had enjoyed herself considerably more than she had expected. Sir Edmund shook hands all round with the relieved heartiness of a man who has survived 12 days of social intensity and emerged intact. Verity was in the entrance hall with her small traveling case, composed as she had been on the first morning. The same composed manner, I understood it better now. It was not indifference. It was the composed manner of someone who has had to be very good at departures, because departures have been a recurring condition of her life, and who has learned to face them with dignity, because the alternative is a kind of endless grief for things that change. She was adjusting the clasp on her case when Crispin came down. He had told me, the previous evening, that he intended to speak privately with Sir Edmund before the carriages departed, to establish his intention and request the appropriate permission, and to follow that conversation with a formal letter to Miss Ashcombe herself within the week, delivered through the proper channels. This was the correct approach. The measured, appropriate, precisely ducal approach. He had described it to me with the deliberate care of a man who has thought through every step and is quite sure of them. He came down the stairs, saw her in the hall with her traveling case and the morning light through the open door behind her, and stopped. She was bent slightly over the clasp and did not immediately look up. When she did, she found him on the third step from the bottom, standing still, watching her with an expression that had no calculation in it at all. Simply the direct, unguarded look of a man who has run out of patience with his own careful procedure. "Miss Ashcombe," he said. "Your Grace," she straightened. "I had a plan," he said. "I was going to speak to Sir Edmund correctly before the carriages left, and then write to you properly within the week. I had it all organized." "I see," she said. Something moved in her expression, not quite amusement, but close to it. "I find," he said, "that I don't want to write. I find that the thought of you getting into that carriage and returning to the Farleys' house and resuming your life there while I resume mine here, knowing what we both know, seems to me unnecessary, or at least premature." He paused. "I did not know 3 days ago what word I would use for it. Now I think unnecessary is accurate." In the doorway, Mrs. Farley went very still. Sir Edmund found something absorbing to examine on the floor. Miss Philippa pressed both hands over her mouth. In the far corner of the entrance hall, Grandmother sat in the chair she had placed herself in approximately 20 minutes prior with her embroidery in her lap and her hands folded on top of it, and the absolute serenity of someone who has been patient for a very long time and is watching the last piece arrive. "I am asking," Crispin said, "whether you might do me the very great kindness of not getting into that carriage. At least not yet. At least not until we have spoken properly, with your full consideration, and your own clear willingness, and I have told you, without letters or proper channels, what I should like." He came down the last 3 steps and stood before her on the stone floor of the entrance hall, and the morning light from the open door fell across both of them in a long, warm bar, and the rest of the house was very quiet. "What would you like?" she said. He looked at her. I had never in my life heard my brother speak the way he spoke next, without management, without the ducal precision that was his habitual armor, just directly and honestly from whatever was behind it. "I would like," he said, "to not be afraid of the weight any more. I have been carrying Havenmere alone for 6 years. I have been very good at it, and it has cost me. I didn't notice what it was costing until this fortnight, until you. I would like to know you, Miss Ashcombe, properly, at length, with the full intention behind it. I would like to know which 3 books you reread and why you chose them, and what your father taught you in that beech wood, and what you make of Gibbon, and what you think of the drainage problem in the East Field, and what you think of everything. I would like," he stopped, and something came through his voice that I had not heard from him in a long time, a roughness, honest and entirely unguarded. "I would like to ask you to stay." She did not look away from him. Her face had the quality it had always had, that full, clear, unwavering presence, but there was something else in it now, something that the composed surface had been holding back. Not overwhelmed, not overcome, simply moved, the way a very sturdy door opens when someone has finally found the right key. "I am a clergyman's orphan," she said. "I have nothing but my wits and a handful of books and a very good memory for Latin." "Yes," he said, "I know. I am not asking you for what you have. I am asking you for what you are." The quiet that followed was the fullest quiet I have ever stood inside. The morning, the light, the open door, Sir Edmund studying the ceiling with great concentration, Miss Philippa making a sound behind her hands that was part sob, and part something else entirely. Yes, Verity said. It was a small word. It was entirely sufficient. Crispin breathed out, and what came with that breath seemed to me to be the 6 years, or the better part of them. He reached out and took her hand, carefully, in both of his, the way a man takes something he intends to keep safe from now on, and he held it and did not let go. Miss Philippa made a noise that resolved itself into a sob of the happiest possible variety, and turned to bury her face in her mother's shoulder. Mrs. Farley patted her daughter's back, and did not attempt to disguise the fact that she was also somewhat tearful. Sir Edmund looked at grandmother with an expression of frank bewilderment, the expression of a man who has just realized he has been the instrument of a design he did not know he was part of. Grandmother received his look with the tranquil satisfaction of someone who has no intention of explaining herself. "Well," Sir Edmund said, to the room in general, "quite." I crossed the entrance hall and sat down beside grandmother in the second chair that had been there all morning, as though placed for me. "You knew from the beginning," I said. "I knew from the moment I met her," she said, "last October at the Farleys' autumn dinner." She spoke about her father's library. She had inherited the books, nothing else, no money, just the books, and she spoke about them the way Crispin speaks about the Havenmere portraits. With that particular love, you know, the kind that is also grief and also pride, and also the ongoing conversation you have with something after the person who gave it to you is gone. She smoothed the embroidery in her lap. I knew then that she was the kind of person he could talk to at midnight about the things that mattered, and she would understand without explanation. "And you waited 9 months. "I waited until I could arrange a house with a good library and a south-facing terrace and a beech wood within walking distance." She looked at her grandson, standing in the hall with Verity's hand held in both of his and the morning light across both their faces. "He needed the conditions, not the management. There is a very important difference." I sat with her for a moment in comfortable silence. "You were right," I said. "I know," she said, and returned to her embroidery. The formalities were observed with the precision Crispin preferred, and the warmth that the occasion generated naturally. A conversation with Sir Edmund Farley that same morning, conducted in grandmother's small study with the door closed, resulted in the proper understanding being properly recorded. Verity remained at Fenmere as grandmother's guest, not as Miss Philippa's companion, not any more. That chapter was quietly closed, while the necessary letters were written and the necessary calls arranged. A letter went to the surviving Ashcombe relation, an elderly aunt in Shropshire, who replied within the week with warmth and a considerable amount of surprised gratitude. Crispin wrote to his man of business. He wrote to the Havenmere steward. He attended to all of it with the capable efficiency that was simply his nature, and I noticed, because I had taken it as my business to notice these things that summer, that he attended to it with a lightness about him that had not been there before. Not giddiness, not the distracted happiness of a young man in his first season. Something quieter and more durable than that. The lightness of a man who has set down something heavy and found that his arms are not as tired as he feared, that he has more capacity for carrying other things than he had thought. He and Verity walked the Fenmere Gardens every morning for the 3 weeks she remained. I watched them sometimes from the upper windows, not to eavesdrop, just to observe the fact of them together. The easy intermittence of their conversation, the way she listened to him with the same full attention she brought to everything, the way he spoke differently with her than he spoke with anyone else, without the layer of ducal management, without the precise efficiency he wore in all other contexts, just plainly, directly, as himself. Once I came around the corner of the yew hedge and found them on the bench near the willow, not speaking at all, simply sitting in the late afternoon light with the quiet ease of two people who have discovered that they can be silent together. This is rarer than people think. Most people cannot manage comfortable silence. These two had arrived at it within 3 weeks, and it seemed to me the surest measure I had seen of what they were becoming to each other. She told him the Latin names of every tree in the Fenmere garden, all of them, systematically, and tested him on them afterward with a relentlessness that he apparently found more delightful than trying, which tells you something about the state of his feelings. He told her about the Havenmere portraits and what his mother had said about them, about the 5th Duke who had looked like a pirate and the 3rd Duchess who had had the expression of a woman who intended to outlast everyone, and about his mother herself, who had known the history of every portrait and had made it living rather than merely dutiful. Verity listened to all of it with the particular quality she brought to listening, as though what she was hearing was genuinely worth hearing, not merely worth acknowledging. He told her about the tenants and the drainage problem and the new roof the eastern wing would need within 5 years. She asked questions that were better than the questions his steward asked, more practical, less deferential, the questions of someone who has managed other people's households and knows what things actually cost. He answered them and then sat back and looked at her with an expression I recognized, the particular look of someone who has just found, unexpectedly, an equal. The engagement was announced in September. Grandmother received the news with a simple, steady happiness that had nothing of triumph in it, or perhaps what it had was the kind of triumph that has lived alongside love for so long they have become indistinguishable from one another. She wrote letters. She received calls. She accepted the congratulations of her friends with the gracious warmth that had always been her public manner and the private satisfaction that was entirely her own. The wedding was at Havenmere, in the chapel on the estate in November. The trees were bare, the sky the particular luminous gray of deep autumn, and inside the chapel the candles made the old stone walls warm and golden. Verity walked in on Sir Edmund Farley's arm. He had offered. She had accepted with the grace she brought to everything, wearing a gown of ivory silk, simply cut and finely made, and carrying 3 late roses from the Fenmere glasshouse that grandmother had arranged to have sent down the week before. Crispin stood at the front of the chapel and watched her come down the aisle with an expression that I will carry for the rest of my life. It was not the expression of the Duke of Havenmere, most sought-after bachelor in 3 counties, finally discharging a social obligation. It was the expression of a man who is watching the person he intends to build the rest of his life with walk toward him in a small candle-lit chapel in November, and who cannot quite believe his good fortune, and is not attempting to hide it. She reached him, he took her hand, the same careful taking as he had on the hall floor in September. He did not let go. Grandmother in the front pew sat with her prayer book open in her lap. I noticed from my seat beside her that she did not read from it. She watched the 2 of them at the altar with the full attention of someone witnessing the exact thing they worked for, and her expression, for once, had no strategy in it, just love. The old, patient, watching love of someone who has known a person all their life and has waited for them to find their way home to themselves. Afterward, at the wedding breakfast in the long gallery at Havenmere, I sat beside her and she ate a small piece of cake and drank her tea and was quiet for a long time. Then she said, thoughtfully, as though she had been turning it over, "The Latin names of trees." "Grandmother, he has been practicing," she said. "Did you know? He went to the Fenmere garden last week in the rain and walked every path and went through all of them, so that when she tested him again he would know them all." She set down her teacup very precisely. That is the man he has always been. He simply needed a reason to remember. I looked across the gallery at my brother, who was laughing at something Verity had said, genuinely laughing, entirely himself, entirely present in his own life, and at Verity, whose face held what it had always held, that clear, full, steady presence, that quality of someone who has arrived at a place and intends to stay. I thought about what grandmother had said in the rose garden that afternoon, that she had simply arranged the conditions, that she had not chosen for him, that Crispin was not a man who could be chosen for, that the choice had to be his, believed and felt and arrived at from inside himself. That what she had done was create a library and a south-facing terrace, and a beech wood within walking distance and a house party of 2 weeks, and then waited. Every step had been his. Every drift toward the corner with the evening light, every morning on the terrace, every hour in the library, every question asked across a picnic table, every dance, every conversation in the rain. He had chosen, freely in his own time, guided only by what he found in her when he was paying attention. Grandmother had simply made sure the conditions were right for him to pay attention. I raised my glass to her across the table. She inclined her head with the small, perfect composure of someone receiving exactly what they expected, and then she turned back to watch her grandson and his wife, and her face was full of the most ordinary and most durable happiness. The kind that does not peak and diminish but simply continues, the way a river continues, because it is going somewhere it was always going. I have told you this because I was there for all of it, and because someone needed to tell it right. The newspapers and the drawing rooms made what they would of it, the Duke of Havenmere choosing a penniless companion, no connections, no settlement, a clergyman's orphan, which is not inaccurate but is not the point. The point is not what was unusual. The point is what was found. The girl with no name, Verity Ashcombe, daughter of a clergyman who loved a beech wood and Latin and books worth rereading, was not a girl with no name at all. She was the most precisely herself person I have ever known, and the most reliably present and the most quietly courageous. She simply had no title. She had herself. As grandmother had said, that is rather more than most people manage to assemble. And my brother, the 8th Duke of Havenmere, who had refused 7 brides in 4 years and spent 6 years carrying a life too large to carry alone. He had needed a fortnight, and a library, and a morning terrace, and a path through the beeches, and one woman who would not flinch. His grandmother, Lady Constance Ashby, widow of the 6th Duke and the most clear-eyed woman I have ever known, did not take credit for any of it. She mentioned, at Christmas that year, that she had always found Fenmere particularly fine in July, and that she was considering organizing another house party the following summer. I asked whether she had anyone particular in mind. She gave me a look of perfect innocence. I have always found that interesting guests make the finest parties. I decided, that Christmas, that I was not entirely without prospects of my own, and that perhaps I ought to take considerably more care about which house parties I chose to attend. Grandmother noticed this shift in my thinking approximately 30 seconds after I made it. The small, certain smile at the corner of her mouth told me, without a word, that she had already been thinking about it for considerably longer. But that, I think, is a story for another time.